The true story of Chris Kyle. He is a controversial sniper with a singular life, criticized by many and praised by others, but possessed of exceptional talent. Today you will learn the true story of Chris Kyle. He is the record holder for precision shooting during the Iraq War, and became a legend shortly after his untimely death, making him known worldwide simply as the American Sniper. Christopher Scott Kyle was born on April 8, 1974, in Odessa, West Texas, the first of two sons to Wendy Kyle, a local deacon and Sunday school teacher, and his wife Debbie. Kyle was raised in an intensely religious environment, regularly attending the church where his father preached. At 8 years old, he received his first rifle and began accompanying his father on deer, pheasant, and quail hunts throughout the region. He spent his adolescence developing his skills on the family farm, tending to a herd of 150 cattle and performing the daily tasks that made up the life of a Texan cowboy. During this time, he also developed an interest in rodeo, riding bulls in small regional competitions. Even without the talent to become a champion, Kyle enjoyed that life, which involved a lot of travel and parties between competitions. Never having excelled in his studies, he completed high school, and, to postpone the responsibilities of adult life, entered Tarleton State University in 1992, where he studied ranch management. However, his history of partying and drinking only intensified there, and he studied little during his university years, leading him to drop out after 2 years. It was during a rodeo competition in Gladewater, Texas, that Kyle suffered a serious accident. The horse he was riding threw him and rolled over him, breaking a rib and displacing his shoulder, as well as causing injuries to his lungs and kidneys. A set of pins was installed in both of his wrists, ending his career in the sport. In 1996, at 22 years old and without a plan for his life, Kyle decided to follow an old personal desire and sought out the military recruitment center in his city, aiming to become a Marine. However, when he showed up, the Marine Corps recruiter was out for lunch, and Kyle began listening to recruiters from other branches. Upon learning he was interested in special operations, the Army recruiter explained the Rangers and their intense jump training to him. Kyle didn't like what he heard but wasn't yet convinced. That was when the Navy recruiter explained the force's primary special operations unit, the SEALs, and their fierce, grueling training program with an extremely high dropout rate. The SEALs, an acronym for Sea, Air, and Land, are an elite force formed by the U.S. Navy in 1962 to conduct special operations, capture or eliminate high-value targets, and collect intelligence behind enemy lines in maritime, jungle, urban, Arctic, mountainous, and desert environments. Its members undergo what is considered the most rigorous training and use top-of-the-line equipment, enjoying mythical status within the armed forces. Kyle listened intently to the recruiter's explanations, and from that moment on, he gave up on becoming a Marine. All he wanted was to become a SEAL. Fueled by excitement, he filled out the necessary paperwork and waived his contract signing bonus, something he was told would increase his chances of getting the slot. But a few days later, a bucket of cold water was poured over him when a rejection arrived in the mail. The Navy had rejected him because of the pins in his wrists, and Kyle sank into discouragement once again, seeking to isolate himself from reality. The following year, he took a job as a ranch hand in Colorado, driving cattle through the state's freezing climate. His tedious routine lasted many months until a sudden phone call changed his story forever. On the other end of the line was a U.S. Navy recruiter asking if he was still interested in becoming a SEAL. With wide eyes, Kyle immediately accepted the invitation, leaving his job and returning to Texas. In February 1999, Chris Kyle reported to the Coronado Naval Base in California to begin the 24 weeks of BUDES, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL, training. This intense training, where dropouts ring a bell and receive a hot meal for quitting, includes physical conditioning, combat diving, and land warfare. At 25 years old, Chris Kyle, who was older than most of his peers, endured the training through sheer willpower, proceeding next to SQT, SEAL Qualification Training, which lasts 26 weeks, and where he distinguished himself in marksmanship. It was during this period, while off duty at a bar in San Diego, that he met Taya Studebaker, with whom he immediately began a romantic relationship. Kyle graduated as a SEAL with Class 233 in March 2001, being assigned to SEAL Team 3, and the following year on March 16th he married Taya as part of the so-called War on Terror that followed the events of September 11, 2001. The George W. Bush administration began a campaign of investigation into the existence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, then led by dictator Saddam Hussein. In the tense months that followed, the deployment of various American military units and its coalition which included Great Britain, Australia, and Poland, intensified in the Middle East as a measure anticipating the start of an armed conflict. Among these units was SEAL Team 3, which had its 8 platoons transferred to Camp Doha in Kuwait in September 2002. There, Kyle was involved in his first operational actions, intercepting Iraqi ships in the Persian Gulf and searching for weapons of mass destruction. In December, off the coast of Yemen, the SEALs found an Iraqi ship carrying Scud missiles, which further increased tensions between the U.S. and Iraq, even as the United Nations continued to mediate for a peaceful solution. By the beginning of 2003, Kyle was worried that his return date to the U.S. was approaching and that he would miss the war that was taking so long to start. But secret preparations for the invasion were already in full swing, and Kyle would not have the chance to go home. In the early hours of March 20, American missiles hit targets in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad, beginning the invasion of the country. That night, Kyle took the gunner's seat of a desert patrol vehicle, being transported into Iraq in the cargo hold of a Sikorsky MH-53 helicopter, with the mission of taking control of refineries on the Al-Faw Peninsula in the south of the country, on the border with Iran. The next day, coalition forces invaded Basra province, departing from their bases in Kuwait and advancing northwest. Quickly avoiding urban centers, the 1st Marine Division entered the city of Nasiriyah on the 23rd, an important road junction, defended by a mix of different Iraqi troops. Providing cover for the Marines in the city was the Charlie platoon of SEAL Team 3, to which Kyle's sniper detachment belonged. On a rooftop observing an approach route used by the Marines, Kyle spotted through his scope a woman slowly approaching the group of soldiers on the street, carrying a hand grenade hidden among her robes. In her other hand, she held the hand of her small son. Kyle reported the situation and received the order over the radio to proceed with taking out the target. He later recalled, "That woman was already dead. I just made sure she didn't take any Marines with her. It was clear that she not only wanted to kill them, but also didn't care about anyone else who would be killed in the explosion or the exchange of gunfire. Children in the street, people in the houses, not even her own son." Pulling the trigger of his 300 Win Mag rifle, the woman fell to the ground, dropping the grenade at her side. The following month, the SEALs were sent to perform reconnaissance of the Shatt al-Arab River, which marks the border between Iraq and Iran, while American armored vanguards advanced against Baghdad. By the end of April, Saddam Hussein's armed forces were in shambles, and the entire country was under American control. President Bush then declared the end of major combat operations in Iraq on May 1st. In July, Kyle finished his first combat tour and returned to the United States, becoming a shooting instructor in Coronado. However, the fall of the Ba'athist regime in Iraq brought a power vacuum that was soon filled by various nationalist and religious factions sponsored by foreign forces who began a massive insurgency in the country. American troops began to be attacked across the territory in ambushes, suicide attacks, and with the use of improvised explosive devices, and the monthly death toll began to grow alarmingly. In the summer of 2004, Kyle volunteered for a second combat tour in Iraq, leaving his wife on the eve of the birth of their first son. Kyle arrived in Baghdad in September 2004, and 2 months later was sent to take part in the Second Battle of Fallujah. With the fall of the Ba'athist government, Fallujah had fallen under the control of insurgents led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, a Jordanian jihadist with significant activity in Afghanistan before settling in Iraq. Zarqawi had 4,000 warriors in the city who turned Fallujah into the most intense urban battlefield faced by Americans since the Vietnam War. There, in addition to serving as a sniper, Kyle acted several times in house-to-house combat. On November 15, in the middle of an intense exchange of fire with insurgents, Kyle abandoned his position to pull a wounded comrade back to American lines. For this and other similar actions in the battle, he began to be called the Legend by the Marines. The Second Battle of Fallujah was won at a high cost by the Americans, with 95 dead and 560 wounded. Observing the long lines of coffins, Kyle felt powerless for not having been able to protect them. An uncontrollable feeling grew inside him that he was responsible for keeping his soldiers alive. In 2005, his kill count gradually grew in the violent streets of Iraqi cities, and although public opinion in the United States was turning more and more against the war on the battlefront, Kyle only cared about protecting the lives of his comrades. "I don't think of the people I kill as people, they are just targets. You can't think of them as people with families and jobs. They put terror in the hearts of the innocent. The things they do, beheadings, dragging live Americans through the streets. The things they would do to children and women just to keep them quiet. That's the easy part of my job. I have no regrets about it." At the end of 2005, he finally ended his second combat tour and returned home, but more restless than ever, considering that he had left behind the soldiers he was supposed to protect. Kyle's constant tension also began to affect his relationship with his family. He couldn't adapt to ordinary life in the American interior, while combat raged half a world away. Despite his wife's pleas, Kyle reported for a third combat tour, arriving in Iraq on a direct flight from the U.S. in April 2006. This time, he joined the SEALs in Ramadi, a city located 110 kilometers west of Baghdad. Ramadi had become the stage for a violent struggle between Shia and Sunni rebel groups, as well as the birthplace of the terrorist group ISIS. In March, 5,500 American soldiers had been sent to regain control of the city against an equivalent force of insurgents who controlled it. Operating in the east of the city starting April 15, Kyle provided cover for the slow and steady advance of the Marines who were taking control of Ramadi by establishing combat outposts along the main roads. Despite the gradual success, every advance was made at a high cost, and on August 2, Kyle was deeply affected by the death of Mark Lee, his friend and the first SEAL to lose his life in action in Iraq. However, the determined and compact enemy resistance also gave Kyle the highest density of targets of his entire career, and between April and August, he recorded 91 kills in successful support actions for the Marines, a feat that earned him the Silver Star on August 27. A few days later, however, he received the devastating news that his newborn daughter was suffering from leukemia, and on September 5, Kyle received clearance to return home. At the same time he was following his daughter's treatment, he attended the funeral on October 12 of SEAL and posthumous Medal of Honor recipient Michael Mansour, who had been killed in Ramadi on September 27 after throwing himself onto a grenade to protect his teammates. Kyle was supposed to give a speech but suffered a panic attack at the moment, being unable to move. He spent the entire year of 2007 trying to balance family responsibilities and his self-proclaimed duty to his soldiers in Iraq. Thus, Kyle volunteered for a fourth and final combat tour in late 2008 when he was sent to serve in the siege of Sadr City, the Shia district in northeast Baghdad that was under the power of cleric Muqtada al-Sadr's insurgents. Kyle described this as his worst and most intense combat tour, as the insurgents were very well armed, and the presence of rocket-propelled grenade launchers was constant in the clashes. He developed deep hatred and contempt for his enemies and began wearing a painted skull on his uniform, inspired by the insignia of the Punisher, a comic book character. His fame also earned him a $20,000 bounty offered by the insurgents, later increased to $80,000. It was also there that he achieved a very rare feat and his longest confirmed kill. Positioned in the second-story window of a house, he began scanning the horizon when he spotted a dark figure on the roof of a residence 2 kilometers away. Kyle observed him for a long time, but no hostile behavior was detected. However, when an American convoy approached, the man pulled out a rocket launcher. To the sniper's complete surprise, Kyle quickly calculated the variables in his head, raised his .38 Lapua Magnum rifle, and pressed the trigger. For fractions of a second, everything seemed to go silent, and he watched through the scope, incredulous, as his target fell at a distance of 1,920 meters. He later described his feat as a very, very lucky shot. On August 30, he finally returned to the United States for good, and after pressure from his wife, requested discharge from the Navy in November. In his 4 combat tours, Kyle had reached the impressive confirmed mark of 160 kills, making him the most successful American sniper in history. In 2009, he founded his own military consulting and training company, Craft International, and in 2012 published his autobiography, American Sniper, which became a tremendous bestseller, catapulting his figure to national stardom in a very short time. His book, although received with praise by the general public, received and still receives harsh criticism for several passages that stray from the truth. Kyle exaggerated his medal count and described combat situations that many colleagues said did not correspond to reality. Surprisingly, he also reported that after Hurricane Katrina passed through New Orleans in August 2005, he went to the top of a building with his rifle and shot 30 looters, an allegation many consider simply absurd. He also claimed to have punched former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura in a bar fight. Ventura sued Kyle for libel and defamation, stating he had never even met him in his life. Eventually, the court ruled that Kyle had made up the entire story to benefit himself in the press, and Ventura won a substantial sum in compensation. Finally, Kyle told of being approached by 2 muggers who wanted to steal his car at a gas station near Dallas, having shot and killed both to protect himself. But when contacted, the Texas police found no record of this occurrence. Between book-related events and television interviews, Kyle volunteered in a program to assist war veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress. He believed that reliving the positive parts of the operational environment, such as camaraderie and shooting practice, could help colleagues gradually overcome their traumas, and so he took them to shooting ranges. On one of these occasions, on February 2, 2013, he tried to help former Marine Eddie Ray Routh by taking him to the Rough Creek shooting range. There, around 3 p.m., Routh drew his pistol and shot Chris Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield several times, killing them both and stealing Kyle's car afterward. That same night, Routh was caught by the police, and in February 2015, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the murders. His funeral procession was followed by thousands of people on the roads to Austin, where he was buried in the Texas State Cemetery. Today, a statue in his honor stands in his hometown of Odessa, and a highway in the state also carries the name Chris Kyle. The figure of the sniper still divides opinion in the United States, with many despising him as a symbol of a disapproved war, and others praising him for his actions in that same war. His early death at the height of his strength served to separate Chris Kyle from his human figure, forever eternalizing the legend of the American sniper.